Hi, I'm Raymond. I'm a psychologist working with MSF. In times of an epidemic, many people start feeling very stressed or anxious or have other overwhelming emotions. They may encounter difficulties in sleeping and unusual bodily reactions. Routines are changed and life is just not as it was before. Being more alert in these times is normal, as it helps us to protect ourselves and others. If the reactions, however, start getting in your way of living your life, you can try the following 3 takes. 1. Take a breath. There are many ways of relaxing your stressed body and your mind. Sometimes even just a few deep breaths would work instantly. Find a comfortable place, focus on your breath, inhale and exhale. Inhale, exhale. 2. Take a break. We often get overloaded with information that worries us more. Take a break by feeding your mind with small, joyful activities, even like looking at the sky. 3. Take care. A healthy diet, some exercise, and good sleep are essential for our body and mind. And also, taking care of each other will make us stronger as a community. Take a breath, take a break, take care. Small little things can have a big impact. If things are not getting better or getting worse, try to find professional help. Remember, you are not alone.
Hi, welcome back. I really love that video. It's so cute, and yeah, you know, like the last thing he said, right? You are not alone. It's so reflective of you know, what we're trying to do, because we're also isolated in our little rooms and in our cities and our countries. And I think one of the greatest things about doing this campus party event, and it's not just in Asia Pacific, but around the whole planet, is really to connect everyone so we don't feel so alone. So I'm coming to, my name is Dave, if you haven't met me before over the last 2 days. And we're coming in straight live from here in Melbourne at Startup Bootcamp, one of our partners who are using as a studio. Yeah, so speaking of the MSF video, right? I mean, this whole event, 31 countries, 1,800 speakers, that's massive. And we've all come together, obviously to connect and to talk about important things, but above all, you know, really in support of the Doctors Without Borders, MSF organization. And, you know, while we are isolated in our homes, you know, all these, I would say, nothing less than heroes. You know, doctors, nurses, you know, they're out in the field, right where the most intense COVID outbreaks are, and where everybody's in ill health, and they're literally putting their own lives and also the lives of their families on the line to help each other. And it's all about being able to show our support for them, because, you know, obviously we can't be there. So the appeal for this entire festival is for everyone to make a donation, no matter how small or even larger, to all these heroes out there. And you can see all the little buttons that you can click on our website, and please take a few moments to click it and make a contribution. MSF is around the world. Oh, okay. So, well, we had a fascinating morning. We started off with NASA. There's this guy who's actually the story architect of Jet Propulsion Lab of NASA. How cool is that? And he talked about storytelling. And then we moved on to a discussion about space being an innovation lab itself. And we had someone who, like, you know, we all know the first 2 men on the moon, right? Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. We had his son, Andy Aldrin, who was 11 when he saw his father, you know, walk on the moon. I mean, was mind-blowing. Yeah, and then we moved on to back on planet Earth, where UNDP came straight in from New York, and also from their field offices in Asia. And they have started the largest accelerator network ever. These are 60 teams of people which have just started like a year ago, covering 78 countries around the planet, and they have, again, such a cool title, right? Head of exploration, head of experimentation, head of solution mapping, and they're really trying to galvanize their communities to solve all these challenging SDG problems. So I thought it would be a really interesting conversation to have about how to build innovation communities. And I don't mean like startups and venture cap, because that's only one little part of one possibility in that sense, right? Innovation is a lot more than startups, technology, and a lot more than just venture capital. And so, why, right? Because actually, let's talk about it. Like 21 years ago, I actually left Singapore to plug myself into the middle of Silicon Valley during the first .com revolution, and got there, and I was taking some courses at Stanford, and also living right in Palo Alto. And it was amazing to see. It was not just about universities and venture capital and startups. It was amazing to see like how people interacted with each other, the culture that people had. And I think a lot of people went to the Valley, in that era, because that kind of defined that generation. And then caught this kind of entrepreneurial bug, and then went back to their countries. And fast forward 20 years. In so many places in Asia, Singapore, Korea, Australia, you name it, right? I mean, there are even now innovators in Bhutan and Cambodia. I mean, when we had a campus party 2 years ago, I deliberately said like, okay, we've all heard the usual suspects, the people coming from the Valley or from the UK or wherever else. But what about the people who are right in our neighborhood, in our neck of the woods, right? So we took our budget and actually flew people in from Bhutan, from Nepal, from Cambodia, and it was almost like the first time that this region got together, and all these people connected, and it's quite amazing. Hopefully, we can be able to do that again physically. So a lot of us have walked this journey in terms of like having this fire lit, right? We get sparked, and then we want to light this fire, but you can't keep the fire burning by yourself. You really gotta get other people, right? And people are the fuel and the fire, right? And then you really want to create a bonfire, and then all that human energy coming together. Really, it's what creates a community, right? And it's not just about money and entrepreneurs. So I have great pleasure today to introduce to you community builders around the region. So I can share a little bit from Singapore's perspective, but we have Hugh from South Korea.
Hello.
Hi, Hugh.
Good to see you.
So just as a quick introduction, I met Hugh I met you I think 7 years ago. Time passes very quickly. Where he was one of the pioneers of the ecosystem in South Korea, and we all gathered in Jeju Island, and I met you for the first time, and he's also part of the TEDx network, and it's amazing to see. It was the first time for me to actually visit Korea. Actually, Hugh, thanks to you, right? Actually not just transiting, but actually going down and seeing what's happening with the young generation in Korea, and you were showing us all the amazing. I remember going down that canal. I can't remember what it's called, but
Yep.
It's the community that formed there. Well, it's always what's it called? Dominated by these chae balls, right? The big institutions. And then there's no space for the little people, right? You want to do something else, and where do you go? But so that's an interesting perspective that Hugh brings to the discussion today. And then the other persons, I'm trying to do into reverse chronological order, right? Or rather chronological order. I think I met Marek next. So can you bring Marek on? Hey, Marek.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, so I met Marek in Singapore when I was actually partnerships head of Earth Hour WWF, and he at that time had a cool job. Also, I was very envious. He was I don't know, he was physically setting up innovation spaces under SAP labs, right?
That's
and
right.
then he invited us to see his lab, and it's like, wow, all the lockers and the movable chairs and the nice you can write on walls and using design thinking. And he was talking about how he had to, in a sense, spark off innovation community within a large corporation, which is not really used to doing innovation in this kind of like very non-linear way, right? So that's one aspect which Marek would bring. But also, much to our shock, because you don't normally see people like from corporate innovation going to academia, right? So, he left Singapore, and then it's like, what happened to him? And then I looked at his LinkedIn profile. What do you mean he's a professor in Queensland, and then he's actually doing stuff there? But true to enough, I mean, he's not in a sense like your typical stereotypical academic, and he's already interested in like writing papers, right? Because he's yeah, it's like, all these stereotypes, right? So he's done a lot of stuff, in Queensland and within his university, and also really throughout his state and Australia in terms of trying to bring people together to innovate. Who could be possibly next? I think I met Nick next. Hey, Nick. So Nick came over from Australia to Singapore, and then we were introduced by a common friend. And he had sold off a company, and he started something called Runway, which is an accelerator. I mean, I'm coming here in from Startup Bootcamp in Melbourne, and then he's also in Victoria. But he started off a accelerator called Runway, and then I thought he had one, but now he apparently has 3 or 4, which is like wow. And so he's really hit the ground and built this network of physical spaces plus the software. And yeah, so I haven't caught up with him for a long time, but this is a great opportunity to do so. And then I guess last but not least is Chad. Hey. So Chad is the person I most recently met. I mean, literally, maybe not even a month ago. I came in, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, in the social media universe, this guy called Chad like started this massive Slack group, and then hundreds of people from the entire country joined it because he was very inclusive. He started bringing people from academia and whoever else was doing accelerators and innovation together, and not just in big cities, but in the countryside and all these smaller counties. So and not only that, also he's actually doing a PhD research and almost about to finish his thesis, I believe, and it's all about innovation and communities. And I was very happy to find out that he was actually originally from Seattle, because I was nearby in Vancouver, and Seattle, as we all know, well, the older people in the room will know, it's like, oh yeah, that's Microsoft, Bill Gates, right? And then Boeing is like, wow, innovation. Microsoft was home of Microsoft, right? But of course, the people in the new generation think of Seattle, and they think of, Jeff Bezos and Amazon, right? One of the big, huge kingpins of e-commerce. And literally in 1996, I was one of the first people like to buy stuff from Amazon. People thinking like, why are you ordering things from South America? And so Seattle, because in a sense like of Jeff Bezos, also became a innovation city and community. So it's a fascinating conversation. I think we could probably talk about this like half a day and have a conference just about it. I think we should do that one day. But in the meantime, we have a conversation for a little bit today. So I guess you all come from different pioneering experiences and journeys. And I was going to ask you like, what are some of the most? I mean, I'm talking about really in the early days, right? What were some of the most pivotal things, important things that you have observed or done yourself that is important in terms of building innovation community? Anyone can start.
I'll go first then, Dave. Well, so thanks for the invite. It's great to be here with colleagues today. I think it's a fantastic topic, very exciting. It's really important in Australia at the moment. We've got some great innovation destinations, but as a country, there's a degree of sparsity. So we're looking to sort of address that and to spread innovation out from the capitals, Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, into the regions. And I think one of the things that I noticed very early on, and it's something that you referenced earlier, it's sort of like a lubricant, I think, of the innovation ecosystem is collaboration. And it's like, it's a currency. There's a current of collaboration. And for regional communities, I think that's one of the things that you've really got to assess, and you've got to look to liberate. It's sort of one of the key things. I don't know what the guys think. I think Chad's got like a similar experience in terms of regional. So yeah.
Okay, so collaboration. Okay, so let's maybe just do a very quick thing, and then we can have a conversation that goes into more depth. What about Hugh in Korea?
Okay. I'm working on the innovation, the same many years in terms of technology and the design things. So there are so many actually happening in Korea because Korea is kind of dynamic, innovative, cities and country at all. So I'm also working for making the Canadian network is the international innovative network. But I'm gonna discuss together. I'm gonna share my experience before, because I used to work for Samsung. So there are so many people work for larger corporate. So it is not easy to make a innovation community inside a company. So I'm gonna share that, how to make an innovation community inside of corporate or inside of company.
Right. So you actually started something within Samsung, and then later on you left Samsung, and then you started
Yes.
doing more stuff outside.
Yes.
So what is one thing that it's maybe not so well known that it's really important in building an innovation community?
Okay. So most important part is actually I used to work for Samsung for 10 years, and then I was the engineer and for mobile device in there. And then, as the larger corporate like conglomerate is kind of rigid in the culture. So there is no innovation, there is no freedom. Just the only thing we have to do is that follow up the order and bottom up, not bottom up, just top down strategy. Yeah. So we made a great, community, because there are so many people work for Samsung at the time, as a user. They think that something, something is not possible. Probably they're gonna change something, including me. So we would like to change something together, but there is nothing, gonna be, possible. We guess, but because of TED, thanks to TED, actually, we learn many things from TED talks and speakers. So at the time, there are so many TED events happening all over the world, including TEDx Seoul, TEDx something like that. So at the time, I made a TEDx Samsung inside of Samsung big corporate, and then we have 100 people actually plugged together for TEDx Samsung. So in the beginning, we start that we're gonna try something not common inside of corporate. So maybe David already that we start the flash mob in the big lobby of the Samsung HQ in Suwon.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine like this very serious formal organization in Korea, and then there was this clip I remembered as a TEDxer, and it went viral because like, what are all these young Koreans doing dancing in the lobby of Samsung headquarters? Like what, So you could see that there was a revolution in a generation,
Yes,
right?
yes,
You can't keep them down and just obey the seniors, right? There
Yeah,
was an energy there, a young energy that couldn't be thing. So I guess one secret of that is find the people to form a tribe and then like make change using your tribe, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
just one thing. The most important part is that the lobby space is just former, just space we just walk through,
Right.
Nothing happened. Nothing
Right.
happened in that space, but we would like to change it in terms of innovation. So
Right.
probably this space could be different. So we start to
Right.
place them up there.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to hear from you a little bit more later on about like how shocked everybody was, because in a
sure.
sense it's the shock factor, right? You can't try to
Yep.
do it slowly. You just shock them very quickly and then see what happens, right? It's a revolution in a sense, not an evolution. What about Marek? Like maybe I can ask you, since you started off at SAP and then a little bit about university thing. Very different environments. But how was it like seeding innovation in these two places?
Sure, Dave. Thanks for this. I have a couple of those pivotal moments that I wanted to briefly talk about. So remember when you met me back then in Singapore, and I'm actually very flattered to hear that you were really excited to see the office and how we were working there. This was an interesting challenge for us because for everyone, I was working for one of the oldest, one of the biggest software vendors in the world, and SAP. And one of the challenge with this software was that it was very important, but also not very cool. And my job, not very cool in the sense of the typical startups or so. My job when I was in Singapore was to actually, connect the young, the emerging ecosystem of startups to this very traditional organization, because we were hoping for a lot of innovation in this space. So the insight that came to me in Singapore was that we really needed to change the lens through which we look at that software. So that's why we had design thinking. That's why we were actually, and I kid you not, we were building beer brewing devices that were powered by SAP software. Okay, this was just to show that you could use this traditional enterprise software to make really cool things, right? So that was insight number one. Now, Dave, you don't know, but between Singapore and Australia, I was also in Palo Alto for a couple of years, or you might know actually, but that was just sort of in between. And back then, I had a slightly different job. My job was to actually sort of energize the innovation ecosystem within the organization, all right? We're in the cool place. It was not about the external developers. It was about the internal developers. Now, for this one, we already had people in the organization. They were already working on the projects, but things needed to be improved. We needed to get people to talk to each other, exchange ideas. There, we realized that we needed to find a new glue, not a new lens, but a new glue, something that would connect people. And that new glue, surprise, was running, like, going outside of the office and going for a run. We created a running competition which had one rule. You had to find a team of 4 people, 2 boys and 2 girls, from different departments, and you had to go for runs together. Nothing else, no other rules. And after a few months of that, people started coming to us and said, I was running with a salesperson and they have this problem of the customer, and I know how to solve it. And now, after the run, I'm solving this problem, right? So that was the new glue. Wow. Now, third and the last one, that'll be it. When I'm working now, in Australia for a university, it's really about the purpose and about the passion, right? So find that new target for people to go for. I don't have a product that I need to excite them about. I don't have those existing relationships. So it's really about this, this target passion. Right now, it happens to be everything around artificial intelligence and new solutions. But in a few years, that could be something else. So these are my 3 lessons, right? New glue, new lens, and new passion.
Cool. Okay, Chad. So you've done a lot of stuff, and so what is one gem, out of all that journey and insights that you've made?
Yeah, thanks for that, David. Yeah, it is really great to be here, and especially hearing some of the insights from some of the others. And I guess maybe building on that, one of the things that's coming through is obviously community is really important. Relationships, definitely. You can't get around community without the people side of things. And just like we heard from Hugh, as far as telling some of that narrative and the story with some of the TEDx and getting the word out there and inspiring. But what we found in Australia, and I started managing an innovation hub around 2016. Around 2015, 2016, we saw an explosion across Australia of innovation hubs, co-working spaces, hacker spaces, maker spaces, accelerator programs, driven largely by government investment. And for a while, a lot of those innovation activities were all things to all people. And it was enough to say we want to be the next Silicon Valley. We want to do innovation-y type things. And that got people around the table. That lasted maybe 12 to 18 months. But then what we saw is, and this was really articulated in the 2018 Startup Genome Report, where they said, look, if you're going to compete, particularly in a global market, you have to focus. What is your burning platform, or what is your burning ambition? What is the one thing your region can be known for? And let's mobilize people around that. We see that, for example, south of Adelaide in Tonsley, where they mobilized around responding to the lack of manufacturing and the shifts that were happening there with the automotive industry, or different regions where they mobilized and say, this is our thing. And what happens then is you have scarce resources, and that gets everybody in the community. And then that starts attracting the investors that want to be a part of that. It starts attracting the manufacturers, attracting the government policy. And so if I could take
you right, it's a little bit about like don't just copy someone or have aspirations that don't come in from inside. Start with yourself first. Look at what you're passionate about and look where your superpowers are, and then in a sense help the confidence to actually move with that, rather than we just want to do the other thing because it's a cool thing. Everybody's doing AI, let's go and do AI. And is that something that you were?
Yeah, that's right. And building on strengths that you already have. Definitely you want to diversify, but diversify from a strength rather than trying to, as you say, come up with something completely different. If you have no technical capability in your region and starting from ground zero to say we're going to be the best in AI and aerospace in a remote community in the middle of Queensland, that might be a bit of a challenge unless you can leverage on something like maybe big space or a partnership with Boeing to then get to drones. So it's try and build on existing assets if you can.
Okay, cool. So I kind of covered everyone for a little bit. So, let me just open it up because this is a kitchen table conversation, right? So don't just wait for me to ask you questions. So already, you guys shared a little nugget and it's like my brain is buzzing, right? So, you hear the importance of having physical space, right? And you hear the importance of really, in a sense, being stealth, right? It's not about innovation. It's about just let's have a run together. So like complete misdirection and then it still happens. And then in a sense, Hugh is like, shock the thing, because actually if you try to do it the usual way, it ain't going to happen, right? So that shock happened, and actually, maybe later on you can share about like what the response was. And obviously I think you did that without asking permission, right? You just went on to do it, right? I think that's by default. And then Nick, you'd like to hear a little bit more, obviously, of what you've been doing over the last couple of years, because you went from your own company and then trying to seed these different, physical places, plus also these communities around these places together. So
yeah. Well, I think there's there's the commonality of experience there from colleagues and what I'm hearing them say. I had a epiphany sitting in a quite well-known restaurant in San Francisco about 7 years ago on the back of an exit from a startup that I'd had that had done well, and thinking about how I make a difference. And we're talking a bunch of expats from Australasia who are in the Valley who are doing well, and we're talking about sort of what are the things that make a difference. And we talked about collaboration, collaboration from running together or from whatever it is, however you make collaboration happen. But going to sort of what Hugh said as well, around sort of culture is there's a dimension in Australia that every community, every country has their own different mix of things that make the hothouse that is, an innovation ecosystem more or less effective with certain inputs. So you've got to change the recipe in every place. And I think that one of the things that with Australia, and I remember we had a guy come out from who was one of the Techstars founders, early days in Vic. We had him online. He's a great guy. But one of the things he said is, like, what's this thing, tall poppy syndrome? What's that He'd never heard of the tall poppy syndrome. And so there's a cultural dimension to innovation in Australia, which needs sort of special attention. And that was it was like an epiphany. I remember sitting at this restaurant and having that discussion. We need to we need to go to work. So there's these precursor things you need to do to grow ecosystems. And culture's a really big part of that. So yeah, that was sort of like a real eye opener for me.
Yep.
Nick, do you think tall poppy syndrome is still a big issue in Australia? Is it getting better, or?
I think that it is.
Okay, so we have to explain what tall poppy syndrome is to the non-Australians.
Tall poppy syndrome. So I'm happy to do that, because the way that I can't remember his name. Sorry. The way that it's best explained with a picture. You see the field of sunflowers, and they're all the same height except for one that sits up above the pack, and that one's going to have the flower lopped off because it's too high. So the whole notion about tall poppy in Australia is don't stand out from the pack, or you'll get your stem cut off, which is you'll get, and so it's part of the British culture, which I think originates a little bit from Scotland as well, is that don't be too out there, don't stand out too much, because if you do, you'll get torn down.
Yeah, and I guess it's pretty much also very similar in Asia, right? Because it's all about, in a sense, the society, the bigger picture, and don't be too outstanding, don't be too different, right? And then we think of the Apple ad, right? Think different, do different. Complete, I guess by definition, innovation.
But don't question your seniors.
Yeah, I mean, you by literally, if it's not different, then it's not innovative, right? If you're doing the same thing as everybody else, that's not really innovation. So I guess we have this kind of fundamental contradiction almost in that sense. Hugh, do you want to?
Sorry, Marek, you had a question?
Oh, sorry.
I was just saying, I'm hoping I'm seeing this sort of getting better in Australia. That's maybe I'm just sort of misguided a bit, but I think there's less of this recently. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I would like to think that that's the case. I think it's generational. So one of the things that we've been doing is one of the initiatives that Runway supports is a program called Upstart. Upstart is a school-based program which we launched in 2014. I've been a sponsor of that since the outset because we looked at it from a grassroots level. We've got to get kids to be prepared to be more entrepreneurial, more innovative at school, and to get some of the skills. Like, kids in the US, they're taught to be, they're natural presenters. They can pitch, they can give you, they'll do the elevator pitch to you at a moment's notice. The natural tendency here is not to do that. It's the opposite. And so we need to go to work on that. I think there's a generational dimension to it, but equally, I think we're chipping away at it too, Marek. And I think there's some interesting, you need lighthouse examples to go to work on that. So like the Atlassian guys, Melanie Perkins and Canberra, and these sorts of things, they impact that.
But I think there's a lot of structural issues that reinforce this as well. So like Marek, I agree with you. I'd like to think it is, but that's also potentially, like from my perspective, a bit of a, like in the innovation ecosystem, we don't feel that as much. And so it can create a bit of a bubble.
Yeah.
But especially when you get into some regional areas, there's very much a concern as far as stepping out. Australia ranks one of the higher countries in fear of failure. When you look at some of the results of the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, we're also number one in intrapreneurship, or in other words, starting a business inside a company. We are one of the higher ones in thinking that we have the capabilities to do it, but we have a fear of actually stepping out and doing it. I think my personal just armchair opinion is that our success maybe contributes a bit to that. The fact that we haven't had a recession for some time, apart from the current COVID. I think we've had some really good things happening, so we haven't had to engage, and so we can, so we don't know what maybe risk feels like. I think that is changing. I think the innovation ecosystem plays a big part in that. And as Nick says, I think some of those examples, the storytelling, and Hugh, you'd be a good one to speak to this as far as your experience with TEDx and just getting the word out there and getting a counter narrative, not against the establishment, because as soon as you put something against something, there's an immediate conflict and tear down, but more providing an alternative that people can step into. And I think that's part of our role in building communities, is creating that sense of, hey, here's something that is possible. You might want to step in and consider it, rather than saying what you're doing is wrong, try this instead. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because in a sense, once you're trying to introduce something new, you obviously have the resistance. And then it's very interesting how many TEDx communities sort of like became the rallying call and rallying flag for the people who were different and they were looking for something, it had new ideas or even about the future, right? And in a sense, because TED was such a successful global brand, the moment you kind of, instead of waving your own flag, right? Or Samsung entrepreneurs, you were waving, in a sense, the TEDx flag, and then that gave you sort of like credibility and legitimacy in a way, and it's kind of like use something else to bring the change that you want to see.
Yep.
There's a thread there. want to pass over to Hugh because I think he's got something to say. But just very quickly off the back of what Chad, you were saying there, Chad, there's an interesting thread there that we see in the regional ecosystems that we look to help to build is those that have experienced transformation. We see two very distinct type patterns of behaviour. There's those that have experienced transformation and those that haven't. Those that haven't, it's sort of like things are changing. So globalisation, digitisation, these types of massive impacts are coming to roost, but they happen more slowly. They're like gas in the room. And it's not until, it's about to kill you that you realise you've got a problem. Whereas I've seen, ecosystems where they've had massive business change and disruption. Those communities are far more open to transform and to embrace innovation and to be collaborative and to support the growth of ecosystems versus those that haven't experienced transformation, which very much goes to what you were saying about that the combination of the fear of failure coupled with success. There's this sort of notion of, well, it's not happening here, we're immune from it. Well, I can tell you it is happening, it's just happening more slowly. You can't see it, and 10 years down the track, a lot of it, your business will have gone.
Yes. So as Nick and Chad has mentioned that there is, same thing happening in Korea. So even in Samsung Electronics too. So the based upon my experience, I'm gonna continue to add up comment about the innovation communities. That the most important part is that it should be autonomous. It should be based on internal incentive. What that means is that in the beginning, there are so many people actually flock together. We are interested in tech, we are interested in innovation, but somebody tell, okay, why we don't change something like that? Why we try this like that? But most people think that it could be failed, it could be dangerous, it could be risky. So it is, community is kind of sandbox, so they feel like it's not safe zone. So I say nobody try before, so we have to try. But everybody say it could be danger, it could be unsafe. So some people ask me that we are not Google because Google the offer people to 80-20% of work environment, right? 80% of time they have to work for a company. 20% of time they can do something whatever they try, right? But everybody say we are not Google. Company don't even offer 80-20. If company Samsung offer that, we can do something. So I said that time, okay, why don't you think of 120 instead of 80-20? 120 means that we just done everything ordered by corporate, ordered by company, because nothing changed, right? And then even we doing 100% though, we still have a time, we still have a capacity, we still have a talent. So just do whatever company do. It's kind of change of attitude, change of perspective. So after that, we're gonna start something like place dancing and the lobby, and we also doing like a lead balloon project like MIT did before. Have you ever heard the lead balloon? MIT did 100 balloons the flying over the sky, and then they have a competition to find 10 lead balloon at the past time. So inside of Samsung we have a very international office, so we hide 10 balloons in international office, 6 in Korea, one to US, one in China, one in Indonesia, whatever. And then people think that we cannot find, we couldn't find because we are not connected. We are not that connected company. But everybody found 10 balloon in 42 hours. We think that wow, it could be done, it could be happen. So at the time, people started thinking, we can change something. Innovation is maybe trial and error, though we can change something. So that is most important starting thing for motivation.
So in a way, it's like using something else to, instead of trying to argue or trying to get people to have a change of mind, you actually get the people to experience something that's a metaphor, and then they experience it, right? They feel it, and then it's like, oh, then already you don't have to fight that battle, and then they're ready to move to the next step. And then I guess again, you took the example of Google and from external things, where in a sense it's not my idea, other companies are doing it, and obviously you pick examples which people respect, and they are more receptive to do that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's most important part of the part that starting
very
or
interesting.
Innovation.
Yeah. So I guess beyond the running, which obviously naturally broke down the silos, what else were you doing in SAP, Marek?
So that's an example of of an organization that's relatively successful. That's actually quite successful, but in very traditional ways, right? So there's a very space that is very well carved out. There's clearly defined demand for it, where the company knows relatively well what needs to be built. But in a sense, that's the innovator's dilemma, right? So SAP used to be a startup, right? 60 years ago. It used to be a business where they wouldn't even have an office, and they would grow amazingly well, right? But at some stage they became the victim of their own success, which is this is our space, this is what we're doing. And what we were trying to do was kind of develop this sidecar approach, where we say, this is absolutely fine, but let's explore something on the side. And if it fails, that's okay. It's a sidecar, we just cut it off, right? But if it's really successful, then we get to grow it. So another thing that was very important for us, for this traditional company, was to also make sure that people who work inside know that they're growing and that their skills are relevant also for the world outside of the company. So there was a period in my professional life in that organization where I would run Arduino workshops. I would teach people how to code microcontrollers. I would run 3D printing workshops, right? Again, just getting people to explore those completely new technologies. We would run hackathons. We were running hackathons with Slack, for instance, right? And building solutions that would integrate that traditional business with something that's cool and modern, right? So that goes beyond running. That's actually developing this program of work that's not directly contributing to the revenue of the organization, but in the long term, possibly creating some opportunities. Now,
and I was just going to ask you, right, before you carry on, was that framed in terms of like, oh, let's do this because it's important for SAP, or was it like, oh, let's do this because it's a new technology, and then in a sense you don't put a lot of expectations, like, oh, just come and play with it, come and learn about it, and like it doesn't need to be some big corporate objective. Like how was it framed within? SAP?
So there were no revenue targets attached to it. There was really that idea of let's explore something new. Let's hope something new comes up. But this is a really good question, Dave, because this only works if you have the top level support, and that's what happened there, right? The CEO said, "I'm going to allocate this much money for that type of activities, and that budget is protected. Otherwise, this budget is considered as something just for fun, right? And the moment there are budget cuts or anything, it disappears, right? But if it's protected by the CEO, that's a completely different story. So what we were doing, we could continue doing it for years and years, despite hiring freezes, despite cost cuts, because the CEO understood that it was very important.
Yeah, it was commitment.
That's a very big otherwise, though, isn't it, Marek? Because I think the cult of corporate innovation in Australia has suffered a little bit of a downturn in terms of the in-house innovation facility over recent years.
Yeah, it's like almost a marketing activity in many cases, right?
Innovation happens here.
We're building a pizza delivering robot, right? But the moment we need to cut on costs, this is probably the first project that will be stopped.
Right.
But
I guess,
think
you know, I was going to say, like, you know, we may be talking with corporates, right? But I guess, you know, be mindful that actually it's the same thing with a country, right? Because in a sense, you know, Singapore, I saw the transition in the 1990s where basically Singapore essentially, you know, for 40 years, I always say this is the economy, right? We were waiting around to tell people to, you know, what do you want us to make with our hands? And then suddenly it has to be like, what do you want to invent or create in your mind, right? And how did, in a sense, a traditional manufacturing economy and country, and also an Asian sort of mindset where like you don't do weird things and different things, how did it change? And really it was again, like the SAP's leadership, it was the commitment of the government seeing that the future of Singapore had to be in innovation, startups, and being original and R&D, right, which we never ever really did before. And you know, the government, once they saw the internet revolution,
I think that's a function of control, I reckon, though, Dave. In a way, I mean, having spent quite a lot of time with business arms both in Australia and Singapore, my view of how Singapore organises itself around innovation is that they're very structured, very controlled, and it's sort of a little bit like Marek was saying around SAP, is that the control of the organisation can drive that innovation and can protect it. One of the challenges that you often see in terms of the Australian experience at least, is too many others have an opportunity to have a say, other stakeholders, there's political dimensions, and that control is diminished and they suffer. So innovation isn't nearly as pointed in those circumstances, and often it's then controlled by, you know, the vagaries of stakeholders and board meetings and, you know, political dimensions, a whole bunch
so
of other things then rain on it.
It gets diluted, or it gets pulled.
It's diluted,
the
diminished,
important
way out.
core direction is kind of lost, right? So actually, my point was basically like, you know, Singapore is, you can almost see Singapore more like a MNC almost, rather than you know, like one of these countries, right? You know, because it can make these types of very strategic, very committed moves, and basically everybody will align. And I think it's also the same in Japan throughout its economic history, you know, when they decided, you know,
if you'll indulge me, it's almost like the reason why Singapore mightn't be innovative is the reason they are innovative. Because
well, actually, we would.
That
right?
controlled environment doesn't usually afford innovation, right?
Yeah, because I mean, neither the government nor the people embrace entrepreneurship or innovation. I mean, you know, that it's like Korea or you know, SAP, right? Yeah. Everybody who joins SAP or everybody in Korea or Singapore is like, oh, you know, be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, and then just join the established industries and just follow that path, right? And then, in a sense, like the people who, in a sense, had to do innovation had no choice because they failed school, right? And then, you know, there's this very, very famous guy who failed, well, I don't know whether he failed school, but he didn't go to university, he went to Polytechnic, right? And then he couldn't path off his, you know, high paying career in corporate or government, Sim Wan Hu, right? And he loved to tinker with music. And he invented, you know, the PC's first soundboard, you know, creative technology, which became a $1 billion company. And, you know, there was a point in time that every single PC had a creative soundboard in it, right? So sometimes I guess, So there are these people who are outliers that kind of like almost sometimes become the innovation. They see the innovation community, right? Because they naturally don't even have choices, right? By definition, they're out. But I guess what we're seeing nowadays is that, you know, especially in this century, is like innovation is so legitimate, and then in a sense the government comes in and then it subsidizes, it throws money in it. And I don't know, I mean, obviously there's a lot of benefit, but you know, and in a sense, like, are people really who are going in or doing it really, do they fit the profile of, you know, who should be innovating? Because, you know, is it just in a sense what they call innovation theater, right? So maybe this is an interesting point, like how do you really, you know, like spark off and in a sense build this or help this engine that's really, you know, has the right a recipe to innovate, rather than all this innovation theater, which a lot of it's going around. Like any insights in that? And I'm really talking about like ground up, and not so much institutional
I think
innovation.
I think, Dave, it's a combination of both, and like we can look at different, you know, from top down approaches. You have the Tamkeen over in Bahrain, which is very much a driver in that, and so you have different government structures which more facilitate. Like, but our ability to do that within Australia with these 3-year election cycles, and the oppositional party back and forth, and you don't know what's going to get consistent funding. And again, a predominance of government funding, then creating a bit of these zombie startups that come in and they're just going from funding program to funding program. And you have all this behavior. But what we can look at, though, I am encouraged by the Australian innovation ecosystem on where it's going, because it is an adaptive system. And whatever the situation is now, we can say it is changing. We are seeing new forms emerge, particularly in regional areas, of organizations and groups driving innovation. It's supported by government. And there's a question here in the chat from Rosita who says, how can we engage, excite more government players for investment or uptake of disruptive innovation, particularly for SDGs? And part of that is not relying on government for the lion's share of the investment, but having them be a contributor to it, but then getting that investment from others, especially if we don't necessarily have like the Twitter mafia that's coming up. We are going to start seeing that from your Atlassian, the engineers popping out, creating their own companies. We are going to see a little bit of that renewal come through, but particularly in a lot of regional areas, we just don't have that as yet. And so I think it is these new structures that are emerging. And we see some examples of this globally, and I'll wrap on this one. It's just like MIT has the regional entrepreneurship activation program. You've got Techstars, which is doing a ecosystem building framework with some pilots in Louisville and up in Canada. And so we're starting to seeing these new forms of organization structures emerge, particularly in regional areas that gets government, risk capital, universities, corporates, and the entrepreneur community all around the table. So that when you go to a region, you say, who's driving economic diversification, who's driving entrepreneurship, then there's somebody who has accountability. And it's not government where it's going to go one side or the other and it gets politicized. And so I'm really excited about those new forms coming up.
Okay. So Hugh, so I don't know about the Korean government's response, because obviously, a bit like Singapore, the emphasis always was big companies and making sure these big companies grew bigger, and then they were fine, right? And then, once you talk about having a nascent something different, the government's like, oh yeah, what is that little thing, right? And obviously it's unfamiliar and stuff. Like, what was the evolution of the Korean government's attitude towards innovation, like ground up innovation, right? Like maybe, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago, and then 5 years ago, and then now. Maybe you could share something from that.
Actually, in Korea, the government actually have a strong power for driving innovation. Even 40 years ago, even 50 years ago, after Korean War, everything's demolished, at least constructed in Korea. So nothing left. So government actually drive innovation. Made a road, made an infrastructure. They spend a lot of money for making big companies like Samsung, LG, Hyundai Motors, like that. So we realize the government driving innovation is quite successful so far. So that's why our government still doing a lot for innovation. So government invests a lot of money for startup ecosystem. Government invests a lot of the money for the senior business model, whatever. Government do everything. So that's why something good for government support a lot for innovation though. The other side is because of government doing like a player. So modern innovation, we need a architect, we need a supporter, we need a player. It's kind of role and responsibility. So there are so many players like startups and makers and entrepreneurs, and government should be play like architect, right? So made a infrastructure and made a big playground for entrepreneurs and startup. But nowadays, is Korean government actually doing a lot. So sometimes they would like to be a player. They would like to be make output by themselves. That's why it could be quite irrelevant for innovation. So we have a lot of regulation because we made a very fast growth of the industry so far. That's why, for example, mobility. For example, Uber is illegal in Korea. In Airbnb, illegal in Korea. There are so many, new modern business could be illegal in Korea because of Korean regulation. We have a very strong positive regulatory system. So that's why governments try to, change this, the culture, the infrastructure into the negative regulation system. Though it's not easy. So nowadays we are on the border of the transition. So before the previous industrial age, we are doing well. Our government is doing very good. But nowadays we have to transit into the new era, like AI driven company business model innovation and community based collaboration. There are so many things that happen, but still we have a very strong government. So nowadays we are thinking, many Korean people think that how to decentralize this government function or law and power. So we are doing well, but we are quite serious situation to how to make that better.
Anyone want to respond to this?
Probably same.
Okay, I guess we got about like 5-10 minutes, or maybe less than 10 minutes. So I guess we can talk about hardware, right? All the physicality and stuff, and then we can talk about the software, which is like all the programs and things, right? But sometimes I like to talk about the hardware, which is like the culture, the values, how people behave, and that's very important, right? Because it's I think we started off with the word collaboration, right? But you can't have collaboration without trust. You can't have collaboration without respect. I mean, let me give you an example. I was at Stanford during the .com era, and I was attending a lecture, and here was what's that guy, David Yang, right? Jerry Yang, sorry, from Yahoo, and he was like he was like Sergey Brin of Google, because that was the most successful company in the entire valley, and he was on stage. And very interestingly, they invited an undergrad student, right, or maybe a postgrad student, I can't remember, but he wasn't even working, right? He was just a student in the university, and he was on stage with Jerry Yang, because this guy is like billionaire, and then like I haven't even earned $1 yet. And it was very interesting to me because people were paying equal attention and respect to both of them. And I said, wow, this is the difference of Silicon Valley, because you don't even find this in, for example, like the rest of the US, right? Maybe. And this was in a sense like some I would say like almost a secret sauce, which you can't really always create, because they were not so much concerned about who was the most successful or the billionaire now. They were concerned about what's the next idea. And they were very, very willing and able, and not even maybe even conscious, to pay attention to what this undergrad student was saying, because in a sense he was representing more the future than Jerry Yang was, because Jerry Yang is like the SAP. Oh yeah, we're just doing this and it's all like so successful, but people were more interested in the next thing rather than the established thing. And anyone like to share something from culture, building culture, being how do you see the right culture in your innovation communities?
Yeah, I guess I'll just, it is about creating that sense where everyone's equal. And the thing about, one of the things I always remember, and this comes back to some of the stuff that came out of the Boulder thesis back in 2012, is this whole notion, obviously, that founders first, right? So the entrepreneur is front and center of everything. We talk about government participating, we talk about investors, everything coming around to it, but every single person in that ecosystem is after one thing, which is that entrepreneur's success. The investor wants a return on the investment. The local government wants some local employees. The mentors want to be part of something bigger than them. The volunteers and the interns want to learn, and like everyone is there around that focal point of the entrepreneur. And so therefore, how do I give what I have? I'll get something back out of it. It is a bit of a give first, but also being self-sustainable as you do it. And that notion, it's what comes out of the Kauffman Foundation as far as the rules of the rainforest, is what Victor Huang, wrote that great book. And just saying there's a different set of rules that we need when you walk into an innovation hub, or when you walk into an innovation community, when you walk into Runway, when you go into an experience that Hugh's creating in his corporate, when you walk into the world that Marek creates in the university. There has to be this counterculture where people walk in there and say, this feels different, because it feels like everything else. If it feels like corporate, people can sniff out that innovation theater, they're going to run. So I would propose to say, how does that culture then pervade? And then it comes from leadership. But I'd be interested from others on, is that accurate? Is that something that you felt, or, and how do you create that?
It's a very interesting thing there.
Yeah, so
sorry, David.
Like a minute each, because we're just about time. So like a minute from Hugh, Nick, and Marek on this point of culture.
Nick first.
And building culture.
Very quickly. I think that we saw, and I just remember Andrew Hyde. You mentioned Boulder Chat, and that reminded me of who, the person that I referenced earlier. Andrew was fantastic, and one of the things that I think that aligns with, or what you sort of direct towards there, is sort of this notion of being selfless. Is within innovation communities, there's got to be preparedness to, like, I just want to help. I just want to make this. I want to move the game on. And one of the things that we see within regional ecosystems that we work in is sort of this notion or dimension of ownership. Is I want to own that. I want to take responsibility for that. Collaboration can't happen in that environment. So you've really got to be prepared to lead by example and say, no, if it's good for innovation here, we're doing it, irrespective of if we gain or lose or whatever. It doesn't matter. There's a dimension of being selfless to really make it happen.
Cool. Okay, Marek?
I wanted to sort of continue on what Chad said. Beware of the innovation theater. By now, everyone has been through the innovation theater. Everyone has seen red tables, green chairs, and yellow carpets, and hackathons and InnoGems and everything else. Close the loop, make sure there's impact coming out of those activities, and make sure that people are aware of, that their time was well spent and contributed to something else. So close the loop.
Yeah, Hugh.
Okay, so if you ask me what is the three principles to how to make a innovation community, then number one should be purpose. So everybody have a purposeful. It should be if they have a purpose, then they can do something based upon their interest. And second stage, I already talked to you that it should be autonomous. It should be kind of based upon internal incentive. But most important part is number three. It is kind of long-term perspective of trust. In order to make the innovation community, we have to build a trust, especially for long term. So we have
give us one example of how trust. How do you build trust?
Because we have to share many things in terms of fail and errors, and even try or something together. So we did the same thing, like dancing together. It makes make me feel like the same tribe, same people inside of the safe sandbox. So right. This kind of trust should be required for the innovation community.
Fantastic. So we covered a lot of ground, as I said, right? This is such an important and fascinating subject, and a lot of it is like not even really out there. And I guess I invited for you to share, but I actually know a lot more people in this region who are on this journey and have been there, done that, and some people who are just embarking on it. Like there's this guy Tashi in Bhutan, and he's the first guy who started the first incubator over there, and he's struggling and always asking people for tips and tricks, right? So I guess if you guys are interested, I'm more than happy to convene a couple more of these conversations, talk about this same thing, and bring in more people from the region, and maybe we could come out with a very interesting wisdom book.
Great idea, okay. Dave.
Yeah. So anyway, So this whole segment in the afternoon was going to be about entrepreneurship, innovation stuff. So the next segment is actually the next session rather is I invited people who are in venture cap or in even a startup headhunter, because we want to go into the character and the charisma of the best entrepreneurs that they have met, and also I have met, because I've met couple of thousand probably in the 2 times I've been a venture capitalist and so on and so forth. So I'll say bye to you guys, but then if you're interested, please stay on, and then I don't know what they're saying, because none of these are pre-programmed conversations, right? So I'm as much looking forward to the insights as maybe you are. So okay, thanks so much for
Dave.
coming in, and see you
Thanks,
later.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thank you.